Welcome to this year's Authors in Conversation panel featuring the 2022 Minnesota Book Award finalists in the competitive children's literature category. The Minnesota Book Awards is a program of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library in the organization's capacity as the Minnesota Center for the Book. This year's Book Awards are sponsored by Education Minnesota and the children's literature category through the generosity of Books for Africa. My name is Daniel Bernstrom, winner of last year's Minnesota Book Award for my picture book, Big Papa and the Time Machine. As we get started, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge the Dakota people, indigenous keepers of the land on which most of this panel are zooming in from today. This land was reserved for the Dakota in the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux, signed with the United States in 1851, and it remains sacred to them today. We also acknowledge the Ojibwe people, fellow indigenous inhabitants of this land. The Dakota and Ojibwe people are the original stewards of story in this place now called Minnesota. The Friends of the St. Paul Public Library, organizers of the Minnesota Book Award, honor this tradition and the knowledge and values embedded in it as we work together to lift up storytellers in our state. For this latest installment of the Minnesota Book Awards popular Meet the Finalists series, I'm pleased to be joined by Joyce Sidman, author of Hello Earth, Poems to Our Planet, illustrated by Miran Laura, and published by Erdman's Books for Young Readers. Megan Maynor, author of Henry at Home, illustrated by Aaliyah Marley, and published by Clarion Books, Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. By David LaRochelle and Mike Wohnoutka, author and illustrator behind How to Apologize, published by Candlewick Press. And Molly Beth Griffin, author of 10 Beautiful Things, illustrated by Maribel Lechuga, published by Charles Bridge Publishing. Congratulations to each of you on your Minnesota Book Award finalist nod. I've been in your shoes and I hope that you all win. In the interest of making the most of our short time together, I'm going to begin with a round robin question, and then I'd like each of you to respond in turn. I'll then have a specific question for each of you on your wonderful finalist book. So, to the first question. Nature appears to touch each one of your works, whether it be animals learning how to apologize, a divided brother and sister finding a connection at a twisty tree, looking for 9 beautiful things on a road trip to a new beginning, or a collection of poetic love letters to a wandering earth. Nature seems to be our moral compass, our place to find belonging, our place to find answers to soulful questions, and our place to wonder. So, can each of you tell me what nature means to you and to your work? We'll begin with David LaRochelle and Mike Wohnoutka.
Well, at first, when I heard that question, Daniel, I thought to myself, boy, does my work really relate to nature? And boy, nature is really important to me. And then I thought, well, I have written some nature books from Minnesota Historical Society Press, Minnesota's Hidden Alphabet, and a new book I just sold, How to Draw a Tree. And all of those books are about really paying attention to nature and looking at it closer. And I think that is important to me. And I love to do that about nature. I love to be out in the woods and hike in our state. But with regards to our book, How to Apologize, and the fact that I have so many animal characters in so many of my books, I think the reason I gravitate to that is because animals make such a nice substitute for people in stories. And there are so many things that you can do with animals that you couldn't really do with people. For example, in How to Apologize, we have a scene where there's a giant elephant driving a car, eating peanuts and being distracted that way, and rams into the back of a little mouse in its car. Whereas if we tried to do it with real people, seeing a bloody accident with people sprawled out on the intersection might not be real funny or appropriate for a children's book. But when you have animals doing those actions, you can get away with it, and you can laugh, and you can have humor. So that's what draws me to include animals in my story. I love doing that.
Mike, can you jump in? And I think, again, with nature, and David talked about it a little bit, but again, why animals? Why animals to lead us through this, how to apologize? Did David tell you what animals to do? I mean, so that's why I want to hear from you on this one too.
Yeah, well, yeah, David, we didn't talk about this question, but he took my answer. But it is, like David said, animals, you can do a lot more with them. There's less expectation of when you have an animal. You expect people to do certain things, and David did have a little book dummy with certain animals, and I went away from some of those animals, but he definitely told me he had me in mind when he was working on the book dummy, and having all of those animals. And when I heard this question as well, I didn't think, I was like, well, nature doesn't play as prominent of a role in my work as nearly as much as Molly and Joyce. But because of my animals in most of my books, they are doing human things. But I started thinking more about it. But once I do get an idea for a story, for example, this book I wrote and illustrated called So Big. Once I had the idea, nature did play a role in it, because it's a back to school book. My favorite season is fall, and I wanted the illustrations just to imbue fall. So everything is very saturated as far as the underpainting with this orange. Well, just the underpainting's orange, so it kind of comes through in all of the final art. And then for Croc and Turtle, the snow fun, obviously they're all outside, and the wintry snowy scenes played a big role in that book. So those are a couple of ways nature plays a role in my book, but it doesn't, for me, it doesn't really isn't the most prominent thing, and the thing that sparks the inspiration, the way that some of David's nature books, and of course Joyce and Molly's.
Well, thank you for that segue. Let's go to Joyce next.
After she figures out how to unmute herself. I would say that nature is pivotal to both my life and my work. And I go to nature to immerse myself in it because it has a balance and a grace that both inspires me and fills me somehow. And I think one of my goals as an author is to try to get children in touch with that feeling of balance and grace, and give them a way into it. I think for them, it gives them a sense of renewal and discovery, and it's mysterious. And even if you learn the science about something, it becomes even more wondrous. I think if you approach it with wonder, because you can learn more about the earth, or more about animals, or more about weather, or anything in nature, and what you learn inspires you to want to know even more, and inspires wonder. And I think with my book, that's what I'm hoping to achieve, is that kind of wonder and awe and even love that they can take along with them, and start to notice themselves and feel that they're connected with it, and give them a new dimension in their lives. And if they're already nature lovers, then to keep that wonder going, I guess.
Well, thank you. And well, connection, wonder. I'm going to move to Megan next. And I mean, this book isn't about nature, but you settle on a tree. You use nature to bring brother and sister together. And I'm wondering if you had some of the same inspiration that Joyce did.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Daniel. I really, like David said, I really enjoyed getting this question because it made me think about the nature in this book a little bit more as well. Zooming out just a little bit, the kernel for the idea for this book came from watching my kids when they were at these ages of these characters. And you know, they could be, let me back up just a little bit more. The twisty tree was a tree that was like we were living in an apartment townhouse building, and it was like at the end of the row of our building. And from adult eyes was kind of like a gnarly, not cute old tree. But because it was so gnarly, it made it great for climbing. It wasn't too big, and so little kids could get into it easily, and it had all these like nooks and crannies. And because it kind of looked like that, it just became called the twisty tree. And so my kids would go down there and climb in the twisty tree. And I think, you know, watching them do that and thinking about myself as a child as well, I think you really, being in nature like that, like being literally in that tree, or in, you know, there were also a row of shrubs that ran behind the building that were the woods, because from adult eyes, this is not a grand tree and that is not a woods, but they're small people, and it's enough nature that you can get in there and it feels like woods and it feels like this grand tree. And I think, kind of to your question about like how does nature work in this book, I think it gives kids independence and a little sense of freedom and adventure. And I think, you know, anchoring it to the twisty tree, it's really a realm unto itself that, and this story belongs to these two kids. The twisty tree is their special place, and whatever happens there, they know about it. It's completely real to them, and it's irrelevant if anybody else gets it or knows about it or anything. So it's sort of, I think, coming back to it at the end of the story too, it's a place that's going to be a touchstone for them forever, ideally.
Well, thank you, Megan. And last but not least, Molly Beth. I'm not even going to say, because your book is all about this. So please expound.
Well, thank you. Yes, my book is all about this. Actually, all my books are all about this. And I'm deeply influenced by Joyce's work. Absolutely. And I'm so glad she talked about wonder and awe and how kids get that and can read that and run with it, and they want to learn everything. And I think that's amazing. So my whole goal with writing for kids is to think about how kids connect to their environment, and to make books that foster that and encourage that and strengthen that bond in a time when we need it more than ever. And it's maybe harder for a lot of us to come by. So that's part of it. And then I also think that it helps adults to do that too, because adults are reading these books with their kids, and then that prompts them to go be outside with their kids as well, and to see the way that kids interact with nature, and to be inspired by that, to sort of reclaim that as adults as well. Because I think, you know, we go outside and we're like tracking our steps, you know, and we're on our phones, and we're busy and we're in a hurry. And so we don't, even if we are outside, we aren't necessarily experiencing it like a child does, with a sort of openness and a playfulness and a fun, that I think we can rediscover as adults as well. So I'm hoping that my books and 10 Beautiful Things especially can help kind of encourage that way of spending time in nature and knowing that that time is valuable, and that the noticing of what's around us is valuable, and that sense of wonder that our kids show us every day is something that we all can kind of foster.
Well, thank you. Let me move now to our first question, and I'm going to keep with this order. We're going to go with David and Mike and their book, How to Apologize. And what I was struck with when I was reading the book, so and it's interesting that Mike said that there was like a book dummy that accompanied David's words or his thoughts on it. And so voice and play, and I want to know from both of you about this. So these are, whenever I pick up both of you books that you've done together, it's a trademark of your work. So like great actors, you can play many different roles. You use voice and play effortlessly to mix personality, humor, and sensitivity into your books. And I wonder often, how can books be so funny and heart-melting at the same time? I'm laughing and then I'm like, oh my goodness, I want to hug my child. So your books, like I said, are all over my home, so I'm aware of your voice and style. I'm used to them, but yet I go back to them looking for a treat, like, a good Tom Hanks movie or something. And this is what I mean. This is what I mean. How to Apologize. Let's listen to the narrator, because there's one narrator, and then this narrator tells children how to apologize. And listen to the voice here. And be sincere. That's narrator. And be sincere, not sincere. Mom told me that I had to apologize for putting your doll in the fishbowl, or I can't go outside and play baseball. So I'm sorry. Sincere. I'm sorry I popped your balloon. I really am. So here's my question to both of you. How do you find voice and style for your book?
Well, Daniel, that was such a nice lead-in. I just want to say thank you and let that be the answer. I don't want to even say anything after that, because I don't even know how I could respond to that. And I'm not sure how to answer that question. So I wish I could just leave it there. But if I have to say something, and as I was trying to think about how do I come up with a voice or for a particular story, I was struck with that that the story chooses the voice, which is a really, really bad answer. It's not a very interesting answer, but that's the way that it seems. And with How to Apologize, as you pointed out, it's a very straightforward narrator who gives these direct ways of how a person should apologize the right way. And then it's all these animal characters who are acting out their scenes, and those are the ones who have the different voices. And I guess I have just maybe too strong of an imagination, because I can easily picture how all these animals would talk. Like the chicken in the story, I can just imagine the chicken saying, she goes, "Look at the new glow-in-the-dark watch I got for my birthday. I'm having a cupcake party on Saturday. I'm sorry I sat on your violin. And guess who's going to star in the dance recital next week?" I can just so easily imagine this self-absorbed chicken who really doesn't care about anybody else or apologizing. And I would be very embarrassed to admit all of the inanimate objects that I have around my house, the toy cows and the toy ducks, that I all have personalities for. And I could tell you what each of them is like, and they could hold a conversation with each other very easily. I know how they would act. So I think I just pretend a lot, and that is easy for me to come up with other voices and characters for stories. So I think that's what's going to be my answer to your very, very beautifully worded question.
And Mike, you cannot deny that Moo is the same style as How to Apologize, right? So thank you, David. I love the demonstration that you're hearing the voices.
Yeah.
But the question equally goes to Mike. You have an artistic style, yes, but you manipulate it per project. And so I want to know how you would answer this question.
Well, I mean, David is the real genius here. We know that. If you haven't heard David read Moo or How to Apologize in its entirety, it's a complete treat. So my job is just to take David's brilliant concepts and do the casting. Like you mentioned the Tom Hanks movie. It's like I have to come up with what the characters look like. And I'm glad you brought up Moo, because it all started, our collaboration started with Moo. And when David brought Moo into our writers group, it was just like this. At the time, David really wanted to be the illustrator. And I just had this vision of how this cow was going to look. I went home to my wife and told her about the story and how much I wanted to illustrate it. But I never thought I would actually do that, because David and I, we didn't know each other that well. We just became a part of the same critique group. But anyway, so I think my job is to take David's brilliant stories and his voices that he creates for these characters and really make these really appealing animals. And so I think that's just my job. Is I have to do the casting. I have to take those characters and do what I can with the illustrations and with the design of the illustrations, the design of the characters. And David gives me this great head start with his little book dummy. And then I just expand from there. So.
Can I add on? I want to add something onto that, Mike, if I can. There are times where Mike's illustrations then inspire the voice. And what I'm thinking of, Mike, is with the book we did, See the Cat, 3 Stories About a Dog. There was a character who had a very small part in that, Baby Cakes the cat. It was just there very briefly. But the way that Mike drew that character, so exuberant, her personality came through so strong. And it was her personality which generated the idea for the sequel to the book. Because of the way Mike drew that cat, I knew exactly how Baby Cakes would respond to anything. I knew exactly what she would do and how she would just be overly dramatic about everything, which drove the story. So there are times when Mike's illustrations help me then end up finding the voice for a book, in this case, the sequel to that one book.
There we go. Wow. Thank you for that answer. And how beautiful to know that the author and illustrator are working together to find the style and the voice. And thank you for explaining how that works. So my next question will go to Megan and Henry at home. And Megan, your book was particularly close to my heart because I'm a father of 5 children. So last year, when my 3 oldest went to school, my 2-year-old was at home.
Yeah.
No joke. She would put on her backpack with the other kids and walk toward the bus. And there were a couple of times I had to grab her from the bus steps and like pull her back. Because she would like wait. She'd sneakily wait and then like dash for the bus. So you picked up on this idea and you focused on the theme of friendship and love and separation and growth. And in fact, we all know what it's like to grow apart from a friend when we move away or when life changes, yet you provide perspective on this answer and you offer the reader a way forward. Tell me why you chose to write about this theme and how did you find an answer to this question about friends growing apart?
Thank you. I love that it related so well to your experience. That's the first part of my answer is that I thought to write about this watching my kids deal with that milestone. So my first two kids are really close in age. I have three kids. I just like to always make sure I don't leave Willa out. But there's a little bit of an age gap. The first two are really close in age. And so everything they did together, and they knew technically who was older, and they knew how old each one was, of course, but there wasn't really any big ramification to that until it was time to start school. So that's where it kind of at the start of the book where it says, you know, they knew all the same people and went to all the same parties. I think that's really true, right? If we go to the park, we're all going. If we go to a birthday party at that age, it's probably a neighbor or a cousin or like one of our family friends, one of the adults' family friends, you know, so everybody goes. And then suddenly this comes up and somebody's getting left behind. And that was my son, and he was frankly furious. He thought this was completely unjust. He was mad. He was mad in the run up to kindergarten, and he was mad that day at the bus stop. Like he had a stick, he was hitting a tree. He was very mad. So that's where the idea came from. And then how to figure out, you know, how to resolve it took me a really long time. This book came out last year. Those two kids are 18 and 19 now, so it took a while. What? I know. But part of the riddle of how to solve it, that was so difficult. I mean, there's lots of reasons it took a long time, but one is that, you know, Henry can't get what he wants. The ending can't be him going, he doesn't get to go to kindergarten. So the thing he wants, he can't have. So how, you know, if it's as far as writing a story, how can it still feel like a satisfying ending? And I think in that long time that I worked on it, I went down a bunch of different roads, and some which were kind of really far away from what the story ended up to be, but were thematically about that same thing, about like realizing, you know, hitting this bump in the road. And also, it's a little bit of a tangent, I'll make it short, but kind of related to that, there's this idea that the kids had at a certain time, they know how old they are, and they know they're getting older, and they can count like 4, 5, 6. I'm gonna eventually, I'll be the oldest. I'm going to get older than you. And then there's this horrifying realization one day, they're like, at the same time, your sister's going to get 6, 7, you're never going to be the oldest. So it's a whole nother devastating realization that was part of one of the roads I went down with this book. It was actually in this book in a way, and then it got paired out. But anyway, I think part of finding a good solution for Henry was to like let him have those really big feelings and be mad. Like there's a big page where it's just roar because he's so upset. And then I think, you know, if the story is working, I think he moves through kind of defiantly doing things on his own at first, like, well, I'll show you, I can do this without you, to kind of from that to like finding out that it's kind of fun to do some of these things on your own. So that, and the swing, I think also is nice because it's such a soothing activity. But for quite a long time, kids can really like enjoy that. Anyway, so I think he kind of moves through that from being really upset to defiant to kind of finding a little bit of peace with it. And then Liza comes home and they get what they realize, I hope this comes through, is that they've kind of each been out on their own gathering some cool new things that now they can share with each other. And that's sort of what's going to continue to happen, you know, the rest of their lives, is that they will be together, they will be apart and have these separate experiences, but those are kind of like little treasures they can bring back to each other and share. So kind of the long answer, but that's where it came from. And that's kind of the way I found to make it seem okay that you're being left behind.
Well, I think you're honest with the fact that, right, there's no quick answer, and trying to find the resolution wasn't quick for you either. That was complicated. I could tell that was complicated. And so when you're telling me that you went down several different paths, I'm like, yeah, because I think I think we, like I said, we all go through that. And I found, as an adult, I found, like, yes, when I've grown apart from a friend or something, that there is still, I grow on my own, but yet when I connect, it's still beautiful. And so thank you for that message to me, as hard won.
Thank you.
We move next to Hello Earth by Joyce Sidman. And for this one, and we'll get to Molly Beth's book next, but you two are like, the words are so tight in both of your work. So it was interesting when Molly Beth had mentioned kind of that fangirl of you, Joyce. But you do measure your words so carefully. And in Hello Earth, it's 22 beautiful poems, and you play with imagery, feeling, and contrast. And in fact, for me, it was about the contrast. It was about the light and the dark, and an enormous galaxy and a solar system contrasted with a small Earth, a giant Earth contrasted with how small we are, fiery Earth, wetness of Earth, sunlight, moonlight, things known and unknown, the good things we do and the noisy things we do. That's just to name a few. I mean, like, good poetry, there's so much packed into each one. And so, like a diamond containing many facets, can you tell us about contrast, or whatever you want, honestly? But both physical and metaphorical, seen and unseen. You play with this so beautifully, and I feel like you're trying to tell me, the readers, a secret message or a riddle. And so would you be willing to share your insight on contrasts in poetry in your work, or whatever you want on this book?
Well, thank you, Danielle. I think you're according me a little more wisdom than I actually have, but it's a wonderful question. And it made me think a lot about my view of the world, and a high school teacher who, showed us, I can't even remember how, but, there is no dark without the light. It was like mind blowing to me. But I think I have always been a pattern finder, and someone that likes to look at opposites. And I thought I would show these because Molly's going to appreciate this. Whenever I go to the North Shore, I try to find the roundest rocks that I can. And I'm obsessive about this. So I actually, I don't know if you can see these, but they are pretty darn round. And yet I am still searching for the roundest rocks. But what I've changed a little bit what I wanted to say about this. I love, after listening to David and Mike, I love writing mask poems, which are poems that you write from a different point of view. And I think that contrast always excites me and makes me think more about the world. And so that's not exactly what I did in this book. These are more letter poems, but they're basically children exploring the earth and then thinking about life from the earth's point of view. So they're essentially looking at that different point of view and trying to figure out, why is this happening? And what does this mean? And what can I learn more about to understand it? But what I loved about what David and Mike said is how the illustrations can inform the text in a book. And this book actually I received the illustrations from an editor. The illustrations for this book were published in a different book with different text in Spain. So Erdmann's publishes a lot of foreign books, and they found this book, and it had other poems in it in Spanish, and they did not feel that those poems were, that they wanted to translate them. What they wanted were the rights to the illustrations, and they wanted somebody to write new poems. And so they approached me with this project. And I was not sure that I could do it. My books had always been, come out of my head. And, but I really fell in love with the illustrations. And I made sure that this poor Spanish poet wasn't going to be upset that I was rewriting his book, because I would be upset if I found that somebody used the illustrations from my book and wrote completely new text. But it was all good. And so then I started poring over these illustrations, and you're right, there are a lot of contrasts in here. There's a scene of snow and cold and ice, and then a scene of a desert. And so I had to look through these and make sense of these illustrations and find a way into them. And finally, the way into them for me was because the people in these illustrations are all very small, and they don't really even have features. They're just doing really interesting things, and they're doing them fearlessly. And I thought, well, those are the children of Earth, and they are fascinated by these landscapes they find themselves in, and they want to explore them, and they want to learn more about them. So that's when I decided to take the first person plural, the we voice, and write to the earth itself. So in this sense, the book really did inspire my text. And yet there were some illustrations that I really wasn't sure about, like this one, like, yeah, that's not really scientifically viable for me. And there were a couple that I threw out, that I couldn't work with. But this one, I just decided, you know what? We have no idea if a creature like this lives. So why should we not entertain that possibility? And so I wrote the poem Mysteries. And we hope you have secret places, Earth, hidden forces, mysterious plants and creatures, undiscovered, unexplained. We hope you will always be one step ahead of us. So it was a whole process of reacting to the text and creating these poems to go along with it. Reacting to the illustrations, sorry, creating the text to go along with it.
I don't know if I've ever heard of that happen. I mean, I know it happens. I don't know if I've ever heard of that happening. And how interesting to be put on the shoe to be put on the other foot.
Yeah.
And the beauty that came from that. How interesting.
Mm.
Well, thank you for that answer. I'm going to move to 10 beautiful things. And Molly, you use the 3 legs of the classic writing stool: plot, character, and setting, to lift your story. And lift your story they do. And you do all this, like Joyce, with tightly woven prose. This is because you tell so much in so few words. Please listen to this, everyone. Lily ran her finger across the Iowa map. An X marked Graham's house on an empty patch of land, Lily's new home. Seems normal. No, no. Plot. This is the first, this page right here. I don't know how you do it. I was frustrated. It's like, darn it. If I could write so tight, but look at this. Plot. Lily is going to a new home with her Graham. Characters. Lily and Graham, but Lily is alone and unhappy. Setting. Road trip to Iowa. Plot, character, setting. And you juggle these three pieces beautifully on almost every page. Tell me how you were able to keep these three elements, plot, character, and setting, in balance to lead us to your emotional conclusion, the 10th beautiful thing.
Well, that's an amazing question. And it's really interesting to me because I really struggle with that a lot. So for me, setting usually comes first. And that this book was no different. It was always a book about how we come to love a place that maybe isn't very lovable at first. So there's setting and theme, right, which has always been there since I first drafted it like 12 plus years ago. So that has not changed. But the character and the plot and everything else have changed drastically over many, many revisions and many years. And it finally, I worked it out to be the book that it is. So I wanted to talk just a little bit about how a book evolves like that, and I will try not to go on forever. But in the early drafts, the character was quite a bit older, and there were more characters in the story. There was a full car. It was a road trip. There was a mother, there were siblings, and I went on many, many road trips sitting in the middle of the back seat as the youngest child. So it had that packed car, energy, and over time it got whittled down to the most important characters, which are Lily and Graham. And Lily got younger and younger as we revised the story. So in the beginning, she was older, and it got rejected many, many times. And one of the things that they always said was that it was too sophisticated for a picture book, and that I got advice from several different people to write it as a middle grade novel. And I did not want to do that because I wanted it to have big, beautiful art, big glossy art on every page. So I didn't want to do that, and I was sticking to it as a picture book. But when it clicked was when my editor at Charlesbridge suggested that I write it in third person. It had been in first person for many years. And moving it to third gave it this little bit of distance where the character could feel these big emotions and these hard emotions, but she didn't have to articulate them herself. So then it really worked for her to get a little younger and a little younger. And then once the artist was on board, and I love that we're talking a little bit about how the art reacts to the text and the text reacts to the art, because the art that Maribel Lechuga gave us for character sketches for Lily, she was so young, and she was younger than she was in the text. So there was a little dissonance there. And what we ended up doing, because we had kind of fallen in love with this cute little person, this sweet little, 4, 5, 6-year-old, was we brought the text younger. So it got revised younger still, and more text taken out as well at that point. So the character changed a lot, and the plot also changed because it was a road trip book in the beginning. It was a vacation, and the surly child did not want to go on the vacation. And it took many drafts to change it to a move, which raises the stakes a ton. And it became the book that it is and had a plot that worked, and had that kind of emotional depth to it. So, 12 years of journeying toward it. And in the end, you're telling me that it sits evenly on those three legs. And so that is really nice to hear. So thank you.
12 years to get that to work. Thanks for the
12
hope.
year, yes.
Thanks for the hope.
Not every book. I mean, every book is different. So that was a long
Well,
one.
thank you. Thank you all. I'm going to move to the last round robin question, and I'm going to go in reverse order. So I know we just heard from Molly Beth, but Molly Beth, you're going to be the first one up, and then Joyce, and then Megan, and then we're going to finish up with Mike and David. So my final question is this. A former Minnesota Book Award winner, Kathy Schwen, once said that she writes to answer questions that matter to her. This intrigued me. You all seem to wrestle with questions that matter. How to apologize? How do we cope when a loved one begins a new stage of life? How do we begin again after a storm? Can you hear us, Earth? What questions matter to you? If that question doesn't apply, can you explain or expand upon the question you were asking in your work? Molly Beth.
Thank you. That is such a fascinating question. I think one of the questions this book asks is, what is home? And I think I'm always writing toward that in terms of, we were talking about setting and nature writing. So what is home is a big one here that we're addressing. But also it ended up being about, how do we get through hard times? And because it was delayed and it came out during a pandemic and nobody could have known that, it was so vital in that moment to help kids answer the question, how can we get through this when it's so hard? And so what I got to see was readers going out in their world and finding beautiful things. And that is how a lot of us got through our days in this last year. Little beautiful things that add up. And so I would say that's how we get through hard times, that and having each other. And so that's my hope for that book.
Thank you. Joyce?
That was such a beautiful answer that I have trouble following. But I think that my poetry comes out of feelings. And so I think one of the questions that I'm always trying to answer is, why do we feel the way we do, especially in regards to wonder? What is it about the earth, about nature, that makes that wonder bloom inside of us? And I have never answered that question, and I think I will probably keep writing until I do answer that question. But with this book, there was a little bit of another question too, which is, how can we learn to love and foster what we're given instead of pursuing something else, some sort of happiness that we're not even sure is attainable? And so what I wanted to address in this book was the fact that we have been given this earth, which has everything that we could possibly need. And it's beautifully balanced, and there are currents that move on their own around the earth that supply us with oxygen and food and sunlight and water, and yet somehow we're not satisfied with that, and we think we need more than that. And so the question that I want to ask children is, why do we need more? Why can't we love and foster what we have been given, since it's such an incredible gift?
Thank you. Megan.
Well, this is just lovely listening to everybody answer this question. Just only slightly intimidating. But I think I appreciated this question. It really resonated with me, the way you worded it, Daniel, because I think definitely I do some of my thinking by writing and try to answer questions. I figure out what I think about things sometimes by writing. And as far as, what questions matter, I think it made me think about what's been sort of a guiding light for me for writing picture books, which is the question is, what matters in the life of a child? Or a picture book should be about something that matters in the life of a child. And kind of having that framework or that lens when you're out in the world watching your child put on a backpack and try and jump on a bus, it kind of helps you notice and grab onto some things that matter in the life of a child that might make a book. And one of the really lovely things I think about picture books that really easily keeps me mentally engaged with them over this long time is that the themes are often just as resonant for adults, right? Like, I'm not going to be upset about someone next to me starting school tomorrow, but the theme of going apart and coming together and trying to keep that special bond, or wondering if it will still be there, or trying to find, comfort and knowledge that it will still be there, that resonates. So I think, I think that just hinging on questions at all is a great way to, keeps me writing, helps me figure out what to write about, and figure out if, any of it can be turned into a picture book. And then I think for the theme of this book, it's a little bit about if we want to expand on answering the question of this book. And what I guess what I really love is at the end, Henry and Liza are back at their twisty tree. And it says, the twisty tree remained their best place, always and forever, only for Liza and Henry and Liza. And when I was writing it, I imagined that there could be illustrations that Henry and Liza grow up, and they are, we see them again hanging out at this tree when they're in middle school, and when they are, teenagers, and when maybe they're back there, with their children, that it's I guess that hopefully that we end knowing that that relationship is solid and will go on.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for the question and your answer there. I know that we do hope, right? We hope for certain illustrations, and that would have been really cool.
Yeah. Oh, I should clarify. I'm really happy with the way it ended out. I don't feel like I need that, but that was guiding the writing for that part.
So David and Mike, and I'm going to be hard on Mike here. So I'm not going to let you say, well, David, David helps direct me. No. I think because artists, you have so much, and I love the last response David gave, where he said there was so much life in a cat. And I agree with that, because my son, he's been reading those books over and over again at home, and I've read them with him. There's so much life in the cat. So what questions do you ask when you're illustrating? What makes you put life into something like that?
Well, that's very nice to hear, Daniel. And I promised you a lowbrow perspective. So thank you for all those beautiful answers, everyone. But well, first of all, I've got two-part answer to this. First of all, when I'm illustrating David's stories, like I said, I do start with just this brilliant concept. And my question I keep asking myself, I mean, I'm not trying to dismiss what I'm bringing to the story. And I actually feel like that is this question. How can I elevate this story? How can I elevate David's already excellent, book dummy and concept? So it's always trying to create characters that are that will resonate with you, and that kids will really enjoy. So that it is, and David and I always talk about this, we have to let our egos go. We want to make the best book possible. And sometimes I'm just copying David's sketches, but also hopefully I'm bringing something to his stories. And where it happens is it's in the sketchbook. And so this is the second part. It's so when I'm writing my own stories, I sketch, I have pages and pages and pages and pages of sketches for every book that I write and every book that I try to write. And the question I ask myself constantly when I'm writing my own stories is, how can I tell the best, or tell a good story? I mean, it's just always asking myself, where is the story? And I've written 5 books that are published that I've written myself. And I feel like that's maybe all I have left, because I keep writing those same stories, but with different characters. And I feel like, oh, I've got this great idea. And I'm like, well, no, that was Dad's first day with just different characters. But I just plug away every day. I work on these characters, coming up with characters. And then the question is, where's that story? What story can I find for them? And there's nothing really more than that. And, it just doesn't click very often, but once it clicks, it's just a wonderful thing. So I know it's not the best answer, but it's basically asking myself, here's the character, where's that story for that character? And I just keep putting those characters in situations until finally something resonates and I can move with that. So.
Thank you for that answer. Elevating David's work. How can I do this? Where's that story? David.
Well, with how to apologize, the question was pretty obvious. Just trying to think of how do you apologize, which was instigated when I was talking with a counselor, and we were just talking about how to apologize and realizing how bad people are at apologizing. Adults are really bad at it, and this was a response to that. But if I think of how, just my work in general, the things that I find matter to myself over and over again, and I'm with Mike with the lowbrow answer there. Some people write about, all these, Molly and Joyce and Megan write about really significant things. And when I started writing, that's what I tried to do, really important questions. And I was really, really bad at that. And my writing mentor, Judy Delton, told me, you're just so boring when you write that way. But what she helped me find was that what I was good at was writing humorous stories and funny stories. And I'll always be indebted to Judy because she taught me that there wasn't anything wrong with doing that. And that isn't necessarily a worse form of writing. So what I think about so often when I'm writing is, how can I entertain kids? How can I make kids laugh? Because I remember just the joy that I had when I was young and reading books. And if I can just make a kid smile or laugh, that makes me feel so happy. And that's enough. That can be enough as well too. And I'll leave the really big questions to people like Megan and Joyce and Molly Beth, who can deal with those things. And the other thing that really matters to me when I'm writing, it's very important to me, is just a respect for kids. And I would say that everyone here, it is so evident in all of our work that we really do respect kids. That sometimes authors might, be overly cute or talk down to kids, but none of us do that. We respect their emotions. Megan was talking about the big emotions that kids have, and we all respect that. And Joyce's book deals with big, topics that you would think people would be afraid to deal with in books, and Joyce doesn't, shy away from that. And Molly's so sensitive with her story, 10 Beautiful Things. And Mike, whose picture books, some of the really simple ones, those emotions that he writes are so respectful to kids. So I think all of us are very, very sensitive to that. I think we remember what it's like to be a kid, and that a child is not a lesser person because they're younger. They're just as much of a real person as an adult is. And I think that shows in all of our work. And I think that matters to all of us.
Well, thank you all for those questions. And thank you, David, for summing up everything, and for the smile and the laugh, the joy that I experienced here. Thanks to our tremendous children's literature category finalists, and to all you watching for taking part in this Meet the Finalists panel. If you enjoyed this talk, you can find a treasure trove of past events archived on the YouTube channel of the Minnesota Book Award steward organization, the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. You can find out more about future programs on their website, thefriends.org. In particular, mark your calendars for Tuesday, April 26th. That's the evening that the winner in this category and 8 others are finally revealed. Please join us in St. Paul at the Ordway Center for the Performing Arts. Tickets are just $22, inclusive of processing fees. Visit thefriends.org/MNBA for details. Goodbye, and thank you for a wonderful Meet the Finalists panel.